Hello and welcome to Augmented Reality UX and UI and Design Thinking lecture that is provided to you as part of the Advanced Augmented Reality course on Code Reality. In this lecture, you will learn more about thinking that goes behind effective and scalable AR applications for all type of platforms, starting from head-mounted displays and finishing with mobile phones. We will dive into design processes, user interface guidelines, and multimodal techniques that can enhance our experience. Also, we will learn about human-centered design approach called design thinking, and I will help you to understand how to measure usability of your augmented reality application. So you will be ready and fully equipped to start the production cycle and basically start the development course with more confidence. Okay, let's get started. But before we begin, actually, it's a quick reminder for you that at this point it will be great to complete these 2 lectures from the Augmented Reality Basic course on human-computer interaction methodologies and perception in augmented reality. These 2 lectures cover basic methods of evaluation in AR and also the perceptual augmentation, how people interact with the real world from the biological point of view. So if you haven't done this, please quickly do them, and let's jump into the advanced course now. I want to start this part by introducing you to the article published by the Time magazine at the end of the last year that covers 10 best gadgets that were created during last 10 years. So look at these gadgets. What do we see here? The voice interface provided by Alexa, or the air interface, the drones that enabled us to fly and see from the top, or for example, potentially driverless cars that can absolutely simplify the way we move around. And I wanted to think about one point. What are we going to see in the next 10 years? Is augmented reality going to be on this list published by the Time magazine in 2029? It will be actually amazing to see this, and I personally think that the spatial computing will be part of our everyday life because it enables us to do things quickly, efficiently, and more enhanced. Speaking of devices, I think it's really interesting to have a look at this really promising graph that shows the rise in the revenue across different types of AR devices like headsets, mobile phones, and VR headsets. So it's really promising, and one of the key points to take from this slide is actually this thin mobile AR part, because just ask yourself, how do people learn about augmented reality usually? What's the entry point to AR market for most of the everyday users? It's mobile phones, basically Instagram filters or Pokemon Go applications that people sort of play and 100% heard of. So when developing your strategy or choosing a correct medium, think about the audience who are going to use this application. Do they have the resources? Do they have the devices? But hopefully everything will be as written on this graph, and we will see the increase revenue and increase use as well. And when we talk about mobile augmented reality, just look at these types of AR applications that are used to access augmented reality on a regular basis. So social media is sitting on the top place. As I mentioned before, that's the entry point. That's how people use augmented reality now. All this Instagram and Facebook filters. And definitely it's followed by games, the most engaging and interactive experience currently offered by AR community. But I'm 100% sure that this graph is now not really representative because unfortunately, due to the COVID-19, I think that education now is somewhere in the middle of this graph, because we definitely accessing the education facilities in a different ways now. It doesn't matter what type of application are you building, what devices are you using, who is your audience, what is the use case. There is always a set of questions you should ask yourself. And I want to introduce you 3 questions that people ask themselves when they're building something new. And it not necessarily applies only to augmented reality. I wanted to start looking at these questions from the real life point of view. Sort of, we have real life situation and we apply this question to this situation. It has nothing to do with augmented reality now. And let's try to have a look at these questions. So the first question is, what information should we display to a user? It's basically what type of information comes to a user, via which channel, how does it work? So the first question is, what information should we display to a user? It basically describes the piece of information that comes to you from an outside and you perceive it. The second question is, when should we display it to them? That's the timing. When in a lifetime, when in a day or in an hour we receive this piece of information, and how we should display it to them. And the last question, at some point, is the most important questions. We should think about really carefully. How we display it is via which channel. What representation techniques are we using? How are we enhancing user experience when we perceive this information? How does it look? How does it feel? So all these questions are sort of built into the last one, but it's really important to understand these 3 main points: what, when, and how. So let's think about driving. An example of giving someone driving directions. So it's a really busy traffic, city center, and you need to help someone to find the right way. So, what information should we display to a user? Let's think that we need to take a left turn in this case. And when should we display that information to a user? Potentially at the right time to reduce the cognitive load, because if the information comes before or later, a person can miss the turn or misinterpret that information, or simply miss the turn itself and basically start the wrong one. And the last one, how we should display this information to a user, via which modality and how exactly they're going to receive this information. So we need to think about carefully. What is the environment? Is this noisy? Yes, it is. It's a traffic. It's really busy and noisy. Is it too bright? What's the country? So, for example, in the UK, it's really dull all the time. It's rainy, it's foggy. Probably it's not too bright. And that information helps you to determine, for example, the contrast of your user interface. Is it a self-driving car? Do we actually need to implement this function? Because probably it's inside the car, so we don't need to think about this. Or maybe it's a futuristic situation. We have heads-up displays, and we have this bracelets that we can give tactile feedback to the user. So all these circumstances that can be in one situation, simply from the really easy information. Take a left turn. And just imagine how complicated it can be, because this information is constantly changing, it's constantly evolving, and the context is evolving itself, because the driving is a process, learning is a process, accomplishing a task is a process. And the context of our interaction is always dynamic. And we need to think about how we can send this experience to a user, via which modality, via which techniques and which interactions. But the most important thing is to remember that the context is always dynamic and is always changing. So our interfaces, they need to be adaptable to these circumstances. In this concept of dynamic design, it's really important to remember that the environment around the user is always changing, and it's impossible to predict all the use cases. So please adapt your design to all potential scenarios: indoors, outdoors, in light environment, in dark environment, in noisy, and all other circumstances. So think about that's something that's constantly changing and try to predict what can be the next step in this case.